Hi, I'm Sharon Castoriano, fertility acupuncturist, and this is all about ovulation. This is a great place to start for someone who is just beginning to prepare for getting pregnant. The three things you're going to learn about in this presentation are: why do you need to know at all about ovulation? How do you know if you ovulate? And the most important thing, how do you know when you ovulate? Why do you need to know about ovulation? Because you can only get pregnant around ovulation time. Ovulation is when an egg is released each month from the ovary, and the egg needs to be fertilized by the sperm in order to develop into an embryo, which then grows and becomes a baby. So obviously knowing about ovulation is the most important thing that we need to know about when trying to get pregnant. Knowing if you ovulate is also essential. I often get asked, how do I know if I ovulate? If your period is regular, most likely you are ovulating each month. And by regular, I mean that your period comes once a month, that you know when to expect your period. It could be every 28 days, every 30, or a variation on that. But if there is a regularity to it, then you are most likely ovulating. Here and there, I've heard of some women who have had very regular periods, but did not ovulate or release an egg each month. But this is not that common. However, if you never know when to expect your period, or sometimes you go for weeks or months without a period, then it may mean that there is an issue with ovulation. It does not in any way mean you won't be able to get pregnant, just that it might be a little bit more difficult. So if you do not have periods that come regularly, then I think it's a good idea to see your doctor to explore further any issues with ovulation. Now let's get to the most important question. How do you know when you ovulate? Let's start by taking a quick look at the basic menstrual cycle. This picture shows a 28-day menstrual cycle. A menstrual cycle is split into two halves. The first half is when you get your period, then your period ends, and then the body begins to build back up a juicy lining in the womb or the uterus, getting ready for pregnancy. Ovulation is when the egg is released. If the egg is fertilized by sperm, it becomes an embryo, and if it implants in the lining of the uterus, then pregnancy begins. If the egg is not fertilized, then the egg breaks down, and this sends a signal to the body that there is no pregnancy, and then after a few more days your menstrual cycle ends, and then you get your period, which is the start of the next menstrual cycle. So how do we calculate when we ovulate? Let's start simply by first making a note of the date when you get your period. Day 1, which is the first day of your menstrual cycle, is the first day of real bleeding. I know that some women have some spotting before their period begins, but this doesn't count. The first real bright red bleeding is the first day of your menstrual cycle. So make a note of that date, and then make a note of the date of the next period, and then count the days in between. For example, if you get your period on September 1st, and then get the next one on September 29th, your cycle is 28 days in length. Ovulation occurs roughly 14 days before you get your period. So here is a fairly simple way to figure out when you're ovulating. This will vary a bit between women, but it gives you a rough idea to start with in the beginning. If you have a menstrual cycle that is 28 days in length, you can deduct 14 from 28 to get 14. If your cycle is a bit shorter, say 26 days, then you will ovulate around day 12. If your cycle is on the longer side, 30 days for example, then you will ovulate around day 16. So 30 minus 14 is 16. Again, there are some exceptions to this. Some women may have what is called a luteal phase defect, which means that that second half of their cycle is much shorter than 14 days. But again, this is not that common. Once you figure out when you ovulate, the next step is to calculate your fertile window. The fertile window is the only time during your menstrual cycle when you can get pregnant. Despite what we have been taught to think, that we can get pregnant at any time during a menstrual cycle if we're having unprotected sex, it's actually not true. There is just a short period of time, about a week in length, when we can get pregnant. Let's have a quick word about sex. If you're having regular sex, every day, every 2 days throughout the entire menstrual cycle, then you don't really need to calculate this fertile window or even calculate ovulation, as you will be having sex around the time the egg is released. If you're having regular periods and having frequent sex, then just keep doing what you're doing for the next 6 months or so to see if you get pregnant. I'll discuss more in my next video series what to do after 6 months of trying if you're not pregnant, but for now let's get back to ovulation. for many reasons, couples are not having regular sex. It can be due to travel with work, religion, other children, or commitments making less time for sex, or couples have reached a point in the relationship where sex is less important, or one or both of the couples have a lower libido. Then it becomes very important to calculate this fertile window so you can time sex with ovulation and increase your chances of getting pregnant. A couple of things to understand when thinking about this concept of the fertile window. The sperm typically lasts up to 5 days inside the uterus after it's released during sex. The egg, on the other hand, is a bit more fragile and only survives for around a day. This means that the fertile window is about 6 days in length, which includes the time the sperm can survive plus the time the egg survives. And now for the most important thing to remember about the fertile window. This is the time before ovulation and the day of ovulation. It is not after ovulation. This is a common mistake that people think that there is time to have sex after ovulation and still get pregnant. If there is one thing that you take away from this presentation is to have sex before ovulation. This is the most important thing to remember. Think of this picture. And I love this idea. A colleague of mine a few years ago gave me this analogy, and I've used it ever since because I think it's perfect in this situation. If you have Madonna or Lady Gaga about to go on stage to perform, do you think she's going to go out there if the seats are still empty? Of course not. So you need to fill up all of the seats in the theater before the diva comes out on stage. So get the sperm in the uterus, get them in there swimming up to the fallopian tubes and hanging out waiting for the egg to be released. Don't wait until ovulation to have sex, as it could be too late because it takes time for the sperm to swim all the way up to the fallopian tubes to meet the egg. So fill all those seats before the diva arrives on stage. This is a chart to show approximate fertile windows based on your cycle length. You can take a look at this and see roughly when your fertile window is. And now for a quick word about ovulation predictor kits. I'm not a huge fan of ovulation predictor kits. I think it's a good idea to confirm you're ovulating and then combine them with the information that I gave earlier to confirm when you're ovulating. But if you use them for 3 months and you see a pattern develop, then I think it's okay to stop using them. Don't worry if 1 month you ovulate on day 12 and then the next on day 14 and then the next day 15. If you're having sex several days before you expect ovulation to occur, then you'll be fine. I think that ovulation predictor kits can increase stress and anxiety in women, and they take the spontaneity out of baby-making sex. Trying to get pregnant often means sex becomes much less fun, and ovulation predictor kits just add to this lack of spontaneity. I say use them to confirm ovulation and then stop after 2 or 3 months. If you have the option, depending on where you live, confirm ovulation with ultrasound. Your doctor will have you come in from around day 8 or so of your menstrual cycle, depending on its length, and then over the following few days, with the ultrasound, you'll see a follicle develop, which contains the egg. You'll see it get bigger and bigger, and then they'll see that it has been released. This is a great way to confirm ovulation and reduce some of that anxiety that women are feeling about their fertility. So what's next? My upcoming series of videos will talk about what to do once you've been trying for a few months of sex timed with ovulation and there's still no pregnancy. I'll go over your next steps and all your options that are available to you. In the meantime, please feel free to contact me with any questions about today's video or about fertility in general. And there's lots more information on my websites at pregnantinthecity.co.il or Dikurnashi, Dikurnashi.co.il. Thanks, and I hope this has been really helpful to you. And again, any questions, please feel free to contact me.